They thought she was just there to patch people up. A Navy nurse with soft footsteps and a clipboard, Lieutenant Sarah Chin had been quietly working in the background of SEAL training camp for nearly 3 weeks. She treated sprains, stitched up cuts, and administered IVs when dehydration hit. Most of the recruits barely registered her presence, just another support role in a world built on grit and muscle. But then came candidate Peterson, 6'4", broad as a doorway, and fresh off a college football scholarship. During a break, he made a crude comment loud enough for the others to hear. When Lieutenant Chin calmly asked him to repeat it, the smirk never left his face. No one expected anything more than a report. Maybe a quiet reprimand. After all, she was just medical staff. What happened next felt like a movie in slow motion. She stepped forward, gave a small nod, and in one seamless motion, she swept his leg, leveraged his weight, and slammed the 240-pound man onto the ground so hard the sand lifted in a cloud. Gasps erupted. Recruits scrambled to their feet. Peterson didn't even have time to blink. Because Lieutenant Chin wasn't just a Navy nurse. She was a hand-to-hand combat instructor, cross-trained in multiple martial arts, with tours that classified more than they revealed. And in that moment, every recruit learned something new. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Especially not the ones who know exactly how to break you. Welcome to Silent Salute, where we discover that the most unassuming people often carry the most surprising capabilities. Before we continue this incredible story, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe that strength comes in many forms, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're honored to share these remarkable stories with you. Lieutenant Sarah Chin had been a Navy nurse for 8 years, specializing in trauma medicine and emergency care for special operations personnel. Her assignment to Naval Amphibious Base Coronado was supposed to be a routine rotation, providing medical support for SEAL training operations while gaining experience with the unique medical challenges faced by elite military units. At 5'6" and 130 pounds, with a quiet demeanor and professional approach to her duties, Sarah didn't project the kind of physical presence that commanded immediate respect from special operations candidates. She looked exactly like what she appeared to be, a competent medical professional focused on keeping warriors healthy and combat-ready. What the SEAL candidates didn't know was that Sarah's path to becoming a Navy nurse had been anything but conventional. Before medical school, she'd spent 4 years as a military police officer, including specialized training in hand-to-hand combat, defensive tactics, and close-quarters protection techniques. Her transition to medical service hadn't been an escape from military combat roles. It had been a deliberate choice to serve warriors in a different but equally important capacity. Sarah had also maintained her combat skills throughout her medical training and nursing career. She regularly attended advanced defensive tactics courses, practiced martial arts in her off-duty time, and had earned instructor certifications in several combat disciplines. Not because she expected to use those skills in her medical role, but because she believed that understanding violence was essential to treating its consequences effectively. Class 351 was typical of SEAL training groups, 26 candidates from diverse military backgrounds, all convinced they had what it took to join America's most elite fighting force. They ranged in age from 21 to 28, came from different branches of service, and represented various levels of combat experience and physical capability. Most candidates treated Sarah with the professional respect appropriate for a medical officer, understanding that her role was essential to their training and their safety. She was responsible for monitoring their health during the intense physical demands of BUD/S training, treating injuries that could end careers if not properly managed, and making medical decisions that could determine whether candidates continued or were dropped from the program. But a few candidates struggled with accepting medical authority from someone they perceived as non-combatant. This was particularly true for candidates who came from infantry or other combat arms backgrounds and had difficulty respecting the military expertise of personnel they considered support rather than warrior classifications. Petty Officer Brad Peterson was the most obvious example of this attitude. A former college football player who'd served 2 years as a Navy Master-at-Arms before applying for SEAL training, Peterson stood 6'4" and weighed 240 pounds of solid muscle. He was physically impressive, reasonably intelligent, and completely convinced that his size and strength made him superior to anyone who didn't match his physical capabilities. Peterson's interactions with Sarah had been professionally correct but subtly disrespectful from the beginning of his training. He followed her medical instructions but with obvious reluctance. He answered her questions but with barely concealed impatience. Most problematically, he made comments to other candidates that suggested he didn't consider her qualified to make medical decisions affecting warriors. I don't understand why they assigned a female nurse to SEAL training, Peterson had confided to several classmates during their second week. This isn't a hospital ward. We need medical personnel who understand what we're going through. Other candidates had mixed reactions to Peterson's attitude. Some shared his skepticism about having non-combatant medical personnel involved in special operations training. Others, particularly those with more combat experience, understood that medical expertise was essential regardless of the provider's gender or combat background. Petty Officer Martinez, who'd served as a combat medic before applying for SEAL training, had tried to correct Peterson's assumptions. Peterson, medical care is medical care. Lieutenant Chin knows what she's doing, and she's keeping us healthy enough to complete training. But Peterson's attitude continued to be problematic, manifesting in subtle ways that didn't quite cross the line into open insubordination but clearly indicated disrespect for Sarah's authority and expertise. Sarah was aware of Peterson's attitude but had chosen to address it through professional excellence rather than confrontation. She dealt with similar situations throughout her military career and had learned that proving competence was more effective than demanding respect. If she could demonstrate superior medical knowledge and effective patient care, most military personnel eventually recognized her value regardless of their initial prejudices. The situation reached a crisis point during the third week of training, when Class 351 was working through advanced physical conditioning that pushed candidates to their absolute limits. The training evolution involved carrying heavy loads over long distances in challenging terrain, designed to test both physical capability and mental determination under extreme stress. Several candidates were showing signs of heat exhaustion and dehydration despite careful monitoring and prevention protocols. Sarah was providing on-site medical support, monitoring vital signs, administering 4 fluids when necessary, and making decisions about which candidates could continue training and which needed medical intervention. Peterson had been struggling with the evolution more than his pride would allow him to admit. His large frame, while impressive in appearance, was actually disadvantageous for the kind of endurance challenges that characterized SEAL training. He was working harder than smaller candidates to maintain the same pace, and his body was showing signs of stress that concerned Sarah from a medical perspective. During a brief rest break, Sarah approached Peterson to check his condition. "Petty Officer Peterson, I need to check your vital signs. You're showing some indicators that concern me." Peterson's response was dismissive. "I'm fine, Lieutenant. Just catching my breath." But Sarah could see signs of heat stress that Peterson either wasn't recognizing or was choosing to ignore. His skin was flushed, his breathing was labored, and his movements suggested the kind of fatigue that could become dangerous if not properly managed. "Peterson, this isn't optional. I need to check your blood pressure and temperature before you continue training." Peterson's frustration with his performance, combined with his ongoing resentment of Sarah's authority, finally boiled over into open disrespect. "Lieutenant, with all due respect, I don't need a nurse who's never been in combat telling me whether I'm fit to continue SEAL training. I know my body better than you do." The comment created an immediate tension among the candidates who overheard it. Everyone understood that Peterson had crossed a line from professional disagreement into personal disrespect that could not be tolerated in military settings. Sarah's response was calm but firm. "Petty Officer Peterson, my medical assessment of your condition is not a suggestion. It's a direct order from a superior officer. You will submit to medical evaluation, or you will be removed from training for insubordination." Peterson's size and strength had always been his primary advantages in challenging situations. Faced with a direct confrontation with someone he perceived as physically inferior, he made a decision that would change everything about how his classmates viewed both him and Sarah. "Lieutenant," Peterson said, stepping closer to Sarah in a way that was clearly intended to be intimidating, "maybe you should worry about medical issues and leave training decisions to people who understand what it takes to be a warrior." The physical intimidation was obvious and unacceptable. Peterson was using his size to try to pressure Sarah into backing down from her medical authority. Other candidates began moving closer, recognizing that the situation was escalating beyond professional disagreement into something that required intervention. But Sarah didn't call for help or step back from Peterson's intimidation attempt. Instead, she looked directly into his eyes with the kind of calm confidence that came from years of dealing with aggressive patients in emergency medical situations. "Petty Officer Peterson," she said in a voice that carried absolute authority despite its quiet tone, You have 5 seconds to step back and submit to medical evaluation, or I will physically restrain you for medical noncompliance and insubordination." Peterson's laugh was ugly and dismissive. "Lieutenant, you're about half my size. I'd like to see you try to physically restrain me." What happened next took less than 3 seconds but would be discussed and analyzed by SEAL candidates for years to come. Sarah nodded once, a small gesture that somehow conveyed both acknowledgement and warning. Then she stepped forward instead of back, moving inside Peterson's reach with the fluid precision of someone who understood exactly what she was doing. Her first move was a palm strike to Peterson's solar plexus, delivered with surgical precision to a nerve cluster that temporarily paralyzed his diaphragm. As he doubled over, gasping for breath, Sarah grabbed his right wrist, pivoted on her left foot, and used Peterson's own momentum and body weight against him. The hip throw that followed was textbook perfect. Peterson's 240-pound frame sailed through the air and impacted the ground with a sound like a tree falling. Sarah maintained control of his wrist throughout the throw, ending the technique with Peterson face down on the ground, his arm twisted in a submission hold that could cause serious injury if he struggled. The entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds. Peterson had gone from standing and intimidating to immobilized and controlled before he could even process what was happening to him. The training area fell completely silent. 25 SEAL candidates and several instructors stood frozen, staring at the scene of a 130-pound Navy nurse holding a 240-pound former football player in a submission hold that he clearly couldn't escape. "Petty Officer Peterson," Sarah said in the same calm, professional tone she'd been using throughout the confrontation, "you are currently experiencing controlled restraint for medical noncompliance and threatening behavior toward a superior officer. If you acknowledge my medical authority and agree to submit to evaluation, I will release this hold. If you continue to resist, I will maintain control until security personnel arrive to remove you from training. Do you understand?" Peterson, still struggling to breathe from the solar plexus strike and completely unable to move due to the submission hold, managed to gasp out his compliance. "Yes, Lieutenant. I understand." Sarah maintained a hold for several more seconds, ensuring that Peterson fully understood his position, then released him with the same controlled precision she'd used to apply it. She stepped back to a safe distance and resumed her professional demeanor as if nothing unusual had happened. "Petty Officer Peterson, please remain seated while I check your vital signs. Your breathing pattern and skin condition indicate possible heat stress that requires immediate medical attention." Peterson sat on the ground where Sarah had left him, looking stunned and confused. The candidates around him were equally shocked, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Martinez was the first to find his voice. "Holy shit," he whispered to the candidate next to him. "Did you see how fast that was?" Chief Petty Officer Williams, who'd been observing the training evolution from a distance, approached the group with an expression that mixed professional interest with suppressed amusement. "Lieutenant Chin," Williams said formally, "thank you for maintaining order and ensuring medical compliance. Petty Officer Peterson, you will submit to medical evaluation as directed, and then report to my office for counseling regarding appropriate interaction with superior officers." As Sarah conducted her medical assessment of Peterson, checking his blood pressure, temperature, and hydration status with the same professional competence she'd shown before the confrontation, Williams quietly asked the question every candidate was thinking. "Lieutenant, where did you learn those techniques?" Sarah continued her medical work while answering. "Chief, I was a military police officer before transitioning to medical service. Hand-to-hand combat and defensive tactics were required parts of my training." Williams nodded understanding, but he could see that Sarah's techniques had been far more advanced than basic MP training typically provided. "Lieutenant, that was some very sophisticated close-quarters combat capability. I've maintained my training over the years," Sarah replied simply. "In my experience, understanding violence helps me treat its medical consequences more effectively." Peterson, meanwhile, was discovering that his heat stress symptoms were more serious than he'd been willing to admit. Sarah's medical assessment revealed dangerously elevated body temperature, signs of dehydration, and blood pressure readings that indicated he was approaching heat exhaustion. "Petty Officer Peterson," Sarah said as she completed her evaluation, "you are exhibiting clinical signs of heat stress that require immediate intervention. I'm administering 4 fluids and removing you from training for the remainder of today." Peterson wanted to argue, but his recent demonstration of Sarah's capabilities had eliminated any inclination to challenge her medical authority. "Yes, Lieutenant. Thank you for the medical care." As Sarah prepared 4 fluids and began treating Peterson's heat stress, the other candidates began to understand that they'd been witnessing something much more significant than a simple disciplinary incident. Word of the incident spread throughout the SEAL Training Command within hours. The story of a Navy nurse taking down a 240-pound candidate with textbook precision became the subject of intense discussion among instructors and candidates alike. But what interested the training staff most wasn't the physical confrontation itself. It was the revelation that they'd been unknowingly working with someone whose combat capabilities might exceed those of many candidates. Commander Stevens, the overall training director, requested a private meeting with Sarah the following morning to discuss her background and its implications for her role in SEAL training operations. Lieutenant Chin, Stevens began, Chief Williams briefed me on yesterday's incident. I understand you have combat training that goes beyond what we typically expect from medical personnel. Sarah nodded acknowledgement. Yes, sir. I was an MP before transitioning to medical service, and I've maintained those skills throughout my nursing career. Stevens reviewed Sarah's personnel file, which he'd requested from headquarters overnight. Lieutenant, your MP record indicates advanced training in close-quarters combat, defensive tactics, and personal protection. But what you demonstrated yesterday suggests capabilities beyond standard MP curricula. Sarah had expected this conversation and was prepared to provide a complete accounting of her combat training. Sir, after transitioning to medical service, I continued advanced training in several martial arts disciplines. I hold instructor certifications in Krav Maga, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and military combatives. Stevens was impressed. Those weren't casual recreational pursuits. They represented serious, ongoing commitment to maintaining elite-level combat skills. Lieutenant, why did you continue combat training after transitioning to medical service? Sarah's answer reflected years of thinking about the relationship between violence and healing. Commander, I believe that understanding how to cause damage helps me understand how to repair it. Treating combat injuries is more effective when you understand combat techniques. Stevens found her logic compelling, but he was also considering the broader implications of having someone with her capabilities assigned to SEAL training. Lieutenant, your combat skills are clearly at an advanced level. Have you considered applying for special operations training yourself? The question wasn't entirely unexpected, but Sarah's answer reflected her deliberate choice of medical service over combat roles. Sir, I considered special operations early in my career, but I decided I could contribute more effectively by supporting warriors rather than being one. Stevens respected her choice, but he was beginning to see opportunities for utilizing Sarah's unique combination of medical expertise and combat capability. Lieutenant, would you be interested in expanding your role here beyond standard medical support? Sarah was curious about the proposal. What did you have in mind, sir? We've been looking for ways to incorporate realistic combat medical training into our curricula. Someone with your combination of medical expertise and combat experience could develop training scenarios that better prepare candidates for operational realities. Stevens explained that SEAL operations often involved medical emergencies and combat situations where traditional medical protocols couldn't be applied. Having someone who understood both the medical requirements and the tactical constraints could significantly improve training effectiveness. We're also interested in developing better integration between medical personnel and operational teams, Stevens continued. Your demonstration yesterday proved that medical personnel can contribute to team security rather than being a liability that requires protection. Sarah was intrigued by the possibilities. Commander, what would this expanded role involve? Stevens outlined his vision. Sarah would continue providing standard medical support for training operations, but she would also develop combat medical scenarios, train candidates in tactical medicine techniques, and serve as an example of how medical personnel could enhance rather than compromise operational capability. Lieutenant, your unique background positions you to bridge the gap between medical and combat operations in ways that could benefit the entire special operations community. Sarah considered the proposal carefully. It would represent a significant expansion of her responsibilities, but it also offered opportunities to contribute to warrior development in ways that aligned with her professional interests and personal capabilities. Sir, I'm interested in the expanded role, but I'd want to ensure that my primary medical responsibilities aren't compromised. Understood, Stevens replied. We provide additional staff to support the medical mission while you develop the enhanced training programs. Sarah accepted the expanded role, understanding that her unique combination of medical expertise and combat capability could contribute to SEAL training in ways that neither pure medical personnel nor pure combat instructors could achieve. The announcement of Sarah's new role created significant interest among both candidates and instructors. The incident with Peterson had already established her credibility as someone whose capabilities shouldn't be underestimated, and her expanded responsibilities confirmed that her skills were valued at the highest levels of the command. Lieutenant Morrison, one of the more experienced candidates in Class 351, approached Sarah during a break in training operations. "Lieutenant, after yesterday's demonstration, several of us have been wondering about your combat background. Would you be willing to share some of your training insights with candidates?" Sarah appreciated Morrison's respectful approach. "Lieutenant, my new role will include developing combat medical training that incorporates tactical considerations. You'll be getting that instruction as part of your formal curricula." Morrison pressed for more detail. "Ma'am, what you demonstrated with Peterson wasn't just defensive tactics. That was advanced combat technique. Where did you develop those capabilities?" Sarah decided that transparency about her background would be more effective than maintaining mystery about her capabilities. "Lieutenant, I spent 4 years as a military police officer, including specialized training in close-quarters combat and personal protection. After transitioning to medical service, I continued training in martial arts because I believed it would make me a more effective combat medic." Morrison was impressed by the deliberate nature of Sarah's skill development. "Ma'am, do you think medical personnel should routinely receive combat training?" "I think medical personnel who support combat operations should understand combat realities," Sarah replied. "You can't effectively treat what you don't understand." The conversation was overheard by several other candidates, who gathered around to learn more about Sarah's perspective on the relationship between medical and combat training. Petty Officer Chin, no relation to Sarah, asked, "Lieutenant, does your combat training change how you approach medical treatment?" Sarah's answer reflected years of integration between her combat and medical skills. "Absolutely. Understanding how injuries occur helps me treat them more effectively. Understanding tactical constraints helps me provide medical care that supports rather than compromises mission requirements." The candidates were fascinated by her perspective, recognizing that they were receiving insights from someone who'd successfully integrated capabilities they typically thought of as separate and distinct. 3 weeks later, Sarah's expanded role culminated in a training evolution that would demonstrate the full scope of her capabilities and forever change how SEAL candidates understood the relationship between medical and combat operations. The scenario was designed to replicate realistic combat conditions where medical emergencies occurred in tactically challenging environments. Candidates would have to provide medical care while under simulated enemy fire, evacuate wounded personnel across difficult terrain, and maintain operational effectiveness despite medical complications. Sarah's role in the exercise was more complex than anyone had anticipated. She wouldn't just be providing medical oversight, she would be actively participating as both a medical provider and a tactical team member. "Gentlemen," Commander Stevens explained during the pre-exercise briefing, "today's evolution will demonstrate integrated medical and tactical operations. Lieutenant Chin will be embedded with your teams as both medical support and tactical contributor." The candidates were surprised by the announcement. They'd become accustomed to thinking of medical personnel as non-combatants who required protection during tactical operations. The idea of a medical provider who could contribute to tactical effectiveness was new to most of them. The exercise began with a simulated patrol scenario where candidates had to navigate challenging terrain while maintaining tactical awareness and mission focus. Sarah was assigned to Peterson's team, a decision that created obvious tension given their previous confrontation. But Peterson's attitude towards Sarah had changed dramatically since her demonstration of combat capability. He now treated her with the kind of professional respect reserved for team members whose capabilities were proven rather than assumed. "Lieutenant," Peterson said during the initial movement phase, "where would you like to position yourself in our formation?" Sarah's answer demonstrated her understanding of tactical principles. "I'll take the number 3 position, Peterson. That gives me good fields of observation for medical monitoring while maintaining flexibility to respond to tactical requirements." As the patrol moved through the exercise area, Sarah's behavior was notably different from typical medical personnel. Instead of focusing solely on medical concerns, she maintained tactical awareness, contributed to navigation decisions, and demonstrated situational awareness that enhanced the team's overall effectiveness. When the first simulated casualty occurred, A candidate wounded by simulated enemy fire, Sarah's response integrated medical and tactical considerations seamlessly. She provided immediate medical care while simultaneously directing tactical responses to the simulated threat. Peterson, establish security to the north while I treat Martinez, Sarah commanded. Chin, provide covering fire while we prepare for medical evacuation. Her medical treatment was efficient and effective, but what impressed the candidates most was how she maintained tactical awareness throughout the medical procedures. She wasn't just treating a patient, she was managing a combat medical emergency while contributing to team security. The exercise continued with increasingly complex scenarios that tested the integration of medical and tactical operations. Each challenge revealed additional aspects of Sarah's capabilities that the candidates hadn't previously understood. During a simulated enemy contact scenario, Sarah demonstrated that her combat skills extended far beyond the defensive techniques she'd used against Peterson. She engaged simulated targets with rifle and pistol, moved tactically under fire, and contributed to team effectiveness in ways that exceeded many candidates' capabilities. Lieutenant Chin is shooting better than half the candidates in our class, Morrison commented to his teammate during a brief break. Where did she learn those marksmanship skills? The answer came during the final phase of the exercise, when Sarah was required to brief the candidates on lessons learned from the integrated medical tactical operations. Gentlemen, Sarah began, effective special operations require integration of all team capabilities. Medical personnel who understand tactical requirements can contribute to mission success rather than compromising it. She continued, but more importantly, operators who understand medical principles can provide better care for teammates and make better tactical decisions when medical factors are involved. Commander Stevens, who had been observing the entire evolution, stepped forward to address the candidates. Lieutenant Chin's performance today demonstrates capabilities that we want to see in all special operations personnel. The integration of medical and tactical skills represents the future of how we approach complex missions. Stevens looked around at the candidates, who were clearly processing the implications of what they'd witnessed. But there's something else you should understand about Lieutenant Chin's background that we haven't previously discussed. Stevens paused for effect before continuing. Before becoming a nurse, Lieutenant Chin was selected for and completed the Army Special Forces Medic course. She's one of only 12 women to have successfully completed that training. The revelation hit the candidates like a physical blow. Special Forces Medic training was among the most demanding military medical programs in existence, requiring not just advanced medical skills but also tactical proficiency that enabled medics to operate independently in hostile environments. Peterson, who had learned more about respecting Sarah's capabilities than anyone else in the class, was the first to speak. Lieutenant, you're a Special Forces qualified medic? Sarah nodded acknowledgement. I completed the 18D course before transitioning to Navy nursing service. The training provided medical capabilities that I wanted to apply to supporting naval special operations. The candidates began to understand that they'd been working with someone whose qualifications exceeded those of many special operations veterans. Special Forces medics were legendary for their ability to provide advanced medical care under impossible conditions while maintaining full tactical effectiveness. Lieutenant Morrison asked the question everyone was thinking. Ma'am, why didn't you stay with Special Forces? Why transition to Navy nursing? Sarah's answer reflected the same deliberate career choices she'd been making throughout her military service. I wanted to develop advanced medical capabilities that could benefit the broader special operations community. Navy nursing provided opportunities for additional training and experience that complemented my SF medic background. Commander Stevens added context to Sarah's explanation. Gentlemen, Lieutenant Chin represents the kind of cross-training and capability integration that defines the future of special operations. Her combination of medical expertise and tactical proficiency enables mission capabilities that neither traditional medics nor traditional operators can provide alone. The candidates were processing the full implications of Sarah's background and what it meant for their understanding of capability integration in special operations. Sarah's revelation fundamentally changed how Class 351 approached both medical training and tactical operations. Understanding that medical personnel could contribute to rather than compromise tactical effectiveness transformed their thinking about team composition and capability integration. More importantly, Sarah's example demonstrated that excellence in one field didn't preclude excellence in others. Her success as both a combat specialist and a medical expert proved that cross-training and capability integration could enhance rather than dilute professional effectiveness. Peterson, whose confrontation with Sarah had started the entire revelation of her capabilities, became one of her most dedicated students in the integrated medical tactical training program she developed. Years later, as a SEAL team leader, he would credit Sarah's training with saving lives during combat operations where medical and tactical requirements had to be balanced simultaneously. Lieutenant Morrison completed SEAL training and went on to serve with distinction in multiple special operations units. He frequently cited Sarah's example when advocating for enhanced medical training for special operations personnel and integrated tactical training for military medical providers. Sarah's training programs were eventually adopted throughout naval special warfare and other special operations commands. Her methods for integrating medical and tactical capabilities became standard curricula that enhanced the effectiveness of both medical personnel and combat operators. But perhaps Sarah's greatest contribution was demonstrating that capability and effectiveness weren't limited by traditional role definitions or conventional expectations. Her success as both a combat specialist and a medical expert proved that excellence was about dedication and competence rather than conforming to narrow professional categories. The incident with Peterson became a legend at SEAL training, shared with new classes as an example of how assumptions about capability could be dangerously wrong. But more importantly, it became a teaching tool about respect, professionalism, and the importance of recognizing excellence regardless of its source. Sarah continued her expanded role at SEAL training for several years, eventually being promoted to Senior Medical Officer and Program Director for Integrated Medical Tactical Training. Her programs influenced military medical education throughout the Department of Defense and established new standards for combat medical capability. Her legacy lived on in the hundreds of special operations personnel who benefited from her training, the enhanced medical capabilities of units throughout the special operations community, and the broader understanding that professional excellence could transcend traditional boundaries and role limitations. The quiet nurse who had seemed unremarkable to SEAL candidates proved to be one of the most capable individuals they would encounter in their military careers. Her example reminded them that in special operations, as in life, the most dangerous assumptions were those that underestimated potential based on appearance or conventional expectations. Years later, when Sarah transitioned to civilian medical practice, she carried with her the knowledge that she'd contributed to developing some of America's most elite warriors. Her unique combination of medical expertise and tactical capability had enhanced their effectiveness and potentially saved lives in operations she would never know about. But she also carried the satisfaction of having proven that excellence knew no boundaries, that capability could be developed across multiple disciplines, and that the most valuable contributors were often those who refused to be limited by conventional definitions of what was possible. This story was brought to you by Silent Salute. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever encountered someone whose quiet competence concealed extraordinary capabilities across multiple fields? Someone who proved that excellence isn't limited to single areas of expertise? Tell us in the comments about the multi-talented individuals who surprised you with the breadth and depth of their capabilities. And if you believe that human potential can transcend conventional boundaries and role limitations, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. Every story reminds us that the most remarkable people are often those who develop excellence across multiple disciplines and refuse to be defined by others' expectations. We'll see you in the next one.